No one expected it. The truck didn't stop because of a warning sign or a sudden noise. It stopped because a thin, injured lion cub stood frozen in the middle of the road, staring through the windshield with eyes that seemed to beg in a way no human ever could. The driver didn't understand at first, but that brief moment, those few seconds, changed the fate of a dying lioness trapped in mud and began one of the most remarkable stories of wild meets human. The wind whispered low across the broken quarry, stirring a trail of dust over what used to be roads. Long ago, machines worked here, digging, grinding, tearing into stone. But now only silence and shadows remained. The sun rose slowly over the eastern ridge, casting fractured light through the clouds and over the dry, scarred land. A lioness walked carefully across the brittle surface. Her steps were measured, not slow from fear, but from calculation. Every paw pressed into the earth like it might disappear beneath her. Her fur, once golden and full, had lost its shine. Thin patches showed along her ribs. But her eyes, sharp and wide, still carried the fire of something unbroken. She wasn't alone. A lion cub followed just behind her, his movements uneven, favoring his left hind leg. He was barely 6 months old, with clumsy paws and ears too large for his face. Every few steps he stumbled, but caught himself before falling. He didn't cry out. He hadn't in days. The lioness, his mother, didn't look back often, but when she did, it was with that instinct all mothers carry, the quiet scan of breath, injury, and presence. She needed to know he was there, still moving, still trying. They had left the forest 2 days ago. There had been a fight, a small carcass, too few scraps, too many hungry mouths. The other lionesses pushed her away. Her cub was weak, and weakness wasn't tolerated. She had defended him, and when she lost, she walked. Not out of pride, but because the alternative was watching him starve among those who no longer saw him as one of their own. Now the quarry stretched ahead of them, a path she didn't know, but one that offered isolation and maybe water. Beneath her paws the ground shifted. She paused. It was slight, a thin crunch, almost too soft to notice. But she noticed. The lioness raised her head, sniffed the air. No scent of prey, no danger either, just the strange metallic scent of stone warmed by heat. She moved forward again, slow, listening with her body more than her ears. The cub's breathing grew louder behind her, not from panic, just tired. The wind carried a new scent, moisture, not rain, not river, old water, stale, but still water. She moved toward it. Ahead, beyond a dead tree and a twisted metal beam, the ground dipped slightly. She stepped carefully around loose rocks and broken concrete, then stopped at the edge of a shallow trench. At the bottom, a thin stream of muddy water collected in a long scar of rock. She turned to her cub and gave a low chuff. He came forward, limping but eager. The lioness jumped lightly down, paws landing with soft thuds on the gravel. She crouched to drink, her tongue scooping slow laps. The water tasted old, but it cooled her dry throat. She drank deeply. Then, as she looked up, just for a moment, the ground beneath her shifted again. Not a sound this time, just a feeling. She stood slowly, muscles tensing. And then, with a low groan, the earth beneath her gave way. It wasn't a fall, it was a surrender. The stone crumbled like brittle paper. Her front paws plunged through the surface and then her chest. She kicked backward instinctively, but there was nothing to grip. She sank. The cub let out a sharp sound, high and broken. She heard him scramble back, pebbles skittering beneath his paws. She tried to roar, but her lungs filled with dust. Her body twisted sideways, weight dragging her into the pocket of soft earth. Her back legs scraped for purchase. Nothing. The mud caught her halfway down, thick and heavy. a forgotten mixture of old cement runoff and rain-softened clay that had pooled beneath the quarry's skin. She struggled once. Hard. She dropped another foot. From above, the cub looked down at her, his ears flattened, eyes wide with confusion and horror. The lioness blinked slowly, gathering breath. She wanted to tell him not to move, not to come closer, not to make the same mistake. But she had no words. She just held his gaze. He stayed frozen, his tail curled tight against his legs, his ribs rising and falling too fast. She twisted again, trying to turn her body, to push upward with her shoulders. But the mud resisted, sucking tighter. The more she fought, the deeper she dropped. The cub cried again, louder this time. It wasn't a roar. It wasn't a call. It was a question. Why can't you get out? She reached one paw forward, pressing it against the inner wall of the pit. Her claws scraped rock. Her body slid sideways. The mud gripped her ribs like hands. She couldn't climb. Not like this. The cub moved closer to the edge. His front paws reached the loose gravel. His face leaned out, searching. The lioness growled, low, not in anger, but warning. Don't. He stopped. His tail flicked once, then again. She sank another inch. Her back legs disappeared. She gritted her teeth and shifted her weight to the side, forcing herself to stop moving. Stillness was the only thing slowing the descent. Above, the wind quieted. The cub sat down at the edge, just out of reach. He looked at her, blinking, his whole body trembling. She closed her eyes, then opened them again. Still here. She had to stay still. She had to save energy. She had to last. Not for herself, for him. The mud pressed in around her chest now, cold and firm like wet stone. Her breathing was tight. Her muscles screamed for action, but action would mean death. A single vulture floated overhead. She didn't look at it. She looked at the cub, and for a moment, just a moment, she thought, let this not be the end of his story. Then she closed her eyes and waited. For a moment, there was no sound, no wind, no bird calls, no scrape of claws or rustle of fur. Just the sharp crack of rock splitting, then the hollow, muffled thud of something heavy giving way beneath the earth. Nayla's world tilted sideways. Her front paws dropped first, sinking through the brittle surface as it crumbled under her weight. Stone shards slid past her flanks like glass. Dust exploded upward, choking her breath, filling her nose and throat with the bitter taste of concrete and ash. Seifu screamed. It wasn't a roar. It wasn't even a cry. It was a shrill, panicked yelp, the raw sound of a cub watching his mother vanish. Nayla twisted mid-fall, instinct overriding pain. She shoved her body toward the edge, claws scraping madly at stone. One rear paw found purchase, briefly, before it slipped again, dragged by her own momentum. Then came the cold, not water, not air, but something thicker, heavier. She hit it with a wet, slapping impact that knocked the breath from her lungs. Not mud, worse. The gray slurry swallowed her from the waist down. It gripped her hind legs instantly, more glue than water, a mix of wet cement, rotted clay, and mineral silt, long forgotten beneath layers of quarry dust. This wasn't just a sinkhole. This was a man-made grave. She thrashed once, a terrible mistake. Her body sank deeper. The thick sludge pulled her hips downward, locking them like a vise. Her muscles, meant for speed and strength, found no leverage. The more she fought, the faster she dropped. Above, the opening she'd fallen through seemed smaller now, and standing at the edge, silhouetted by the morning light, was Seifu. His eyes were wide, too wide. They searched the shadows, frantic, until they found her, their gaze locked. And Nayla felt something in her heart tear clean down the center. She tried to roar, to tell him to run, to call for help, anything, but the sound caught in her throat. What came out was a low, strangled growl. Broken. Powerless. Seifu took a step forward. "No!" She shook her head sharply, her body sinking another inch as the motion robbed her of stability. The last thing she needed was for him to fall in too. Seifu froze. His chest heaved. Then slowly he began to back away, one paw at a time, hesitant, his eyes never leaving hers. Good, she thought. Good, my son? But she didn't say it. Couldn't. The mud crawled higher. It wrapped around her stomach like a living thing, tugging, claiming, patient in its cruelty. She flexed her legs again, searching for a foothold. Nothing. Only the sickening slurp of suction, as if the earth itself was swallowing her whole. She tried to breathe slow, to calm herself, to stop the panic. Panic would steal her strength faster than the mud. But how do you stay calm when your cub is watching you die? A whimper broke through the air. Seifu. He was pacing now in small circles at the crater's edge, tail twitching with rising dread. Every few seconds he looked at her. Then he looked beyond, around, desperately seeking something, someone. There was no one, no lions, no herds, no rangers, no passing tourists. This was not a safari zone. This was the forgotten corner of a forgotten map. And they were alone. Nayla's mind reeled. Her thoughts raced faster than her body could move. There had to be a way. Some way. She could still get out. She had to. She had survived droughts, hyena attacks, even betrayal. She couldn't die like this. Not in the mud, not where no one would ever know her name, not with Seifu watching. The mud shifted again, a slow grinding sound from below. The pressure around her chest increased. She tried to lift one paw. It didn't move, not even an inch. A buzzing began in her ears, not sound, but blood. Her heart pounding faster, louder. Seifu cried out again, louder this time. His small body leaned forward, ears flattened, eyes shining with confusion. He didn't understand. Why wasn't she moving? Why wasn't she climbing out? Why? Wasn't she the invincible mother he had always believed her to be? She opened her mouth to speak, not with words, but with breath, with expression, with a look that said everything. But before she could, he turned and ran. She didn't see which way, just the blur of his tail disappearing behind the rocks. And then she was alone. Truly alone. The wind returned, slow and bitter. It carried dust into the pit, sprinkling it over her fur like ash. Her back began to ache. Her muscles twitched from tension. Her whiskers trembled with each shaky breath. Far above, the sun climbed higher. It would be hot soon. Too hot. The pit would bake. The sludge would harden. And she would become part of it. She exhaled slowly. So this was it. This was how it ended. Not in a glorious chase, not in battle, but in silence, in shadow, in a forgotten grave built by hands that never imagined she'd be here. But even in that thought, there was something else. Seifu, running, looking. Maybe he would. Find help. Maybe. A sound, soft, distant, impossible. Paws, on stone. Nayla's ears twitched. She lifted her head as far as she could. Not Seifu. Too heavy. Not feline. Something else. A shape appeared on the far side of the pit. A lion. No, a lioness. Older. Scars on her face. Eyes like smoke. Then another. And another. 3 lions. Members of her former pride. She recognized them instantly. Sisters by blood or bond. They had once hunted together, slept beside her, groomed Seifu when he was still too small to walk straight. She wanted to cry out, but she didn't need to. They saw her. They paused. Their bodies were still, their ears forward. They sniffed the air, reading the fear, the mud, the scent of helplessness. And then, one by one, they turned away. No growls, no words, no fights. Just silence. Nayla's heart broke in that moment, not because they left, but because it meant she had truly become disposable. The pride had no space for the weak. That was the law of the land. Harsh, fair, unforgiving. She lowered her head, let her eyes drift closed. But then, again, a sound. This one sharper, rhythmic, not paws, hooves. A group of goats rounded the ridge, their bells clinking softly as they moved. Behind them, two figures in bright cloth guided the herd forward. Maasai herders. Humans. Nayla's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to scream, to thrash, to make herself seen. But she couldn't. The pit was too deep, the mud too thick, her voice too weak. The herders passed without stopping, just shapes against the sunlight, their shadows falling across the broken ground like ghosts. They didn't look down. Why would they? No one looks for lions in places like this. Another gust of wind, another hour gone. Her vision began to blur. The edge of the pit shimmered in the heat. The mud crept higher, pressing into her ribs now. She couldn't feel her legs anymore. Her thoughts grew distant, scattered, and just as sleep began to claim her, she saw it. A shadow, smaller than the others, quick, desperate. Sefu. He was back. His paws were cut and bleeding, his fur matted with dust, his breathing ragged. But he had come back, and this time he wasn't alone. Far behind him, something moved. A shape, a sound, not a lion, not a goat, not a hyena. An engine, faint but growing, wheels against dirt. A truck. Nayla's eyes opened wider. Her heart surged once more. Was it real? Had he found someone? Or was her mind giving her comfort in its final hour? Sefu reached the edge of the pit again. He leaned forward. He roared, not with fear this time, but with urgency. A call. A plea. The same way she had once called for him. And beyond the ridge, the engine grew louder. A cloud of dust followed it, rising into the sky like smoke. Nayla's breath hitched. "Not yet," she begged. "Not yet. Let me hold on a little longer. Let me see who comes. Let me see who answers the cry of a lioness in the mud. Let me see if help still exists in a world like this." And so she stayed awake, and she waited. The sun climbed higher, turning the quarry into a wide-open oven. Heat shimmered over the broken ground. The thin puddle of muddy water near the trench had already begun to shrink, leaving a dark ring of wet soil like a bruise on the earth. The wind had died down, and with it went the only comfort the morning had offered. Down in the pit, the lioness barely moved. Only her eyes stayed alive. They tracked the edge above her, watching the sky, watching the cub, watching the world that had already started to forget she existed. The mud hugged her body like a second skin. It was colder than it looked, cold enough to steal warmth from her bones, even while the air above burned. Her breathing was shallow now. Every inhale felt like pulling air through a narrow crack in stone. At the rim, the lion cub stood with his paws spread wide for balance, ears flattened, tail low. His face was wet around the eyes, dust clinging to his whiskers. He stared down at her as if he could pull her out, with willpower alone. The lioness blinked once. Slow? A message? Stay back. The cub's chest rose and fell too fast. He shifted his weight forward, then stopped, as if something inside him finally understood the warning. He turned in a tight circle, searching the empty land for anything that could help. There was nothing. No herd, no other lions, no shade, just rock and silence. Then he did something that made the lioness's heart tighten. He opened his mouth and called. Not a roar, not a threat. A thin, desperate cry that echoed across the quarry walls and vanished into the sky. He called again and again. The lioness listened, her eyes burning with helpless love. She wanted to answer him. She wanted to tell him she was still here. But she didn't waste the breath. She saved it the way a drowning creature saves air, one shallow pull at a time. Minutes passed. Then something moved at the far ridge. A shape stepped into view. A lion, young, lean, with a mane that hadn't fully grown in. He walked with the confidence of someone who still believed the world owed him something. The cub froze, his body tensed, uncertain. The lioness knew that shape immediately, the male who had once stayed close to her in the nights when the grass was cold, the male who had eaten beside her, the one who had disappeared when stronger lions arrived. He stopped at the rim of the quarry and looked down. His eyes met hers, and in that moment the lioness felt the old wound open again, not the mud, not the hunger, but the betrayal that never truly healed. The cub stepped forward, letting out a small warning sound. The male ignored him. He kept staring at the lioness as if she were a problem he hadn't planned for. His tail flicked once. His jaw tightened. The lioness held his gaze. There was no anger in her eyes, only one silent truth. This cub is yours too. For a heartbeat, the male's ears dipped back. Something passed through him, hesitation. Maybe even regret. He took one step forward, close enough that the cub flinched. The lioness's breath caught. Was he going to help? Was he going to jump down? Was he going to do the impossible? Then the male turned his head, scanning the quarry, checking the horizon. He looked toward the distant grasslands, toward the open sky, toward the places where danger might come from. And in that glance, the lioness understood. He wasn't thinking about saving her. He was thinking about what it would cost him. He stepped back. The cub cried out, sharper now, almost furious. The male didn't answer. He turned away and walked off the ridge, disappearing behind the rocks as if none of this had happened, as if she wasn't there, as if she didn't matter. The lioness closed her eyes for a brief moment, and the pain inside her felt heavier than the mud around her ribs. When she opened them again, the cub was still standing at the edge, shaking with rage and fear. He looked down at her, then toward the ridge where the male had vanished. Then he did something different. He didn't cry again. He didn't panic. He made a choice. The cub backed away from the pit, limping as he turned. His paws slipped on loose gravel, but he caught himself and kept going. He glanced back once, eyes locked on his mother's face. The lioness blinked again. Go. The cub ran. Not fast, not graceful, but determined. He moved across the quarry like a spark trying to outrun the wind. Dust kicked up behind him. His injured leg slowed him, but he didn't stop. He didn't look back again. The lioness listened to his footsteps fade. Then she was alone. The sun hammered down. The mud began to change. A thin crust formed on the surface, tightening around her body like drying cement. It wasn't just holding her anymore. It was hardening. She tested her shoulders once, just a slight push. The mud answered with a slow pull downward. She stopped immediately. Her heart pounded. She forced herself to stay still again, saving breath, saving strength, saving hope she wasn't sure she still believed in. Above her, a shadow drifted across the rim. A vulture, then another. They circled in silence, patient as time. The lioness kept her eyes on the bright strip of sky, refusing to watch them. Her throat burned, her tongue felt thick, her thoughts slowed, heavy and distant. But then, faintly, impossibly, a sound reached her ears, not wings, not paws, a low rumble, metal on dirt. An engine. At first she thought it was her mind playing tricks, offering comfort before the end. But the sound grew clearer, closer, vibrating through the ground like distant thunder. The lioness opened her eyes wider. She stared at the rim. And she waited. Because somewhere out there, her lion cub was running toward that sound with everything he had left. And if the world had any mercy at all, it would answer him. The road was old, cracked in places where tree roots had pushed through the earth over the years. It hadn't seen maintenance in a long time, only the occasional tire track from wildlife rangers or a dusty supply truck making its way across the lesser-known corners of the reserve. Dust hung low behind the moving vehicle now, rising into the morning heat like smoke from an invisible fire. Inside the truck, the air was thick with silence. Thomas kept both hands on the wheel, his weathered knuckles stiff, eyes hidden behind scratched sunglasses. The lines around his mouth hadn't moved since they started the morning drive. He wasn't a man of many words, especially not after a night patrol. Beside him, Chloe adjusted the strap on her backpack, then leaned her forehead against the window. Her short curls were damp with sweat, and her face bore the tired glaze of someone who'd been awake too long, seen too much, and was trying not to feel too deeply. They weren't supposed to be out, posed, this long. Their night shift had ended hours ago. A patrol through the southern ridge, tracking elephant movement and checking for signs of illegal poaching activity. The camera traps had all been fine. No snares, no bodies, just dry earth and the occasional footprint, most of them old, some too fresh. Thomas liked it that way. He didn't trust quiet days. "Next ridge," he muttered, more to himself than her. "We'll cut back east from there." Chloe nodded, but didn't speak. The engine hummed low beneath them, steady and familiar, the kind of hum that lulls your thoughts into drifting. She found herself staring at the windshield, watching dust flicker in the sunlight, and for a moment she forgot where they were. Until Thomas hit the brakes, not hard but fast enough that the seatbelt caught her chest. "What?" she began, but the words stopped when she looked up. There, standing directly in the road, was a lion cub. It was small, far too small to be alone, and trembling on all four legs. One of its back paws hovered slightly off the ground, as if injured. Its ears were flat, its tail low, but it didn't run. It didn't even flinch. It stared at the truck with eyes wide open. And in those eyes was something Chloe would never forget. It wasn't the wild look of a predator. It was urgency, desperation, a silent, unrelenting plea. Thomas leaned forward, one hand still on the brake. "Get the binocs," he said. Chloe didn't move. "Chloe," he said again, sharper this time. She blinked, then fumbled for the field binoculars hanging from the dashboard hook. She raised them to her eyes and adjusted the dial. Beyond the cub, the land opened up into uneven rock and scattered dry brush. A faint path led up a slope toward what looked like an old quarry wall. "I think he's alone," she whispered. "No cubs alone unless something went wrong," Thomas muttered. The lion cub took a single step forward, then stopped. Chloe lowered the binoculars. "He's trying to get our attention?" Thomas looked at her, then back at the cub. The engine idled, quiet but alive. They sat like that for one breath, 2, 3, and then, suddenly, the cub turned. It limped off the road, heading toward the quarry's edge, pausing every few strides to glance over its shoulder. Thomas swore under his breath, shifted the truck into gear, and followed. The vehicle moved slowly, the tires crunching across brittle gravel and sun-baked soil. Chloe leaned forward, scanning the horizon. The cub didn't disappear. It led them. Unsteady, but determined, like it had nothing left except this one chance, like it understood more than it should. They reached the rim of the quarry a few minutes later, and that's when Chloe saw her. At the bottom of the pit, nearly buried in hardened mud, lay a lioness, still, motionless. Only her face remained visible above the surface, her amber eyes half closed but tracking every movement. "Oh my God," Chloe whispered. Thomas cut the engine. They both got out, boots crunching the ground. The heat hit them instantly, thick, blinding, like standing under a blow-dryer. Flies buzzed near the edge of the pit. A thin circle of vultures hovered high above. Chloe stepped forward, crouched down, and peered into the hole. "She's alive," she said quickly. "But she's going to suffocate. That's slurry mud, maybe mixed with old cement." "She's got a cub," Thomas said, nodding toward the small body pressed to the edge of the pit, tail flicking, muscles tense. Chloe turned to him. "We can't leave her." "I didn't say we would." Thomas was already walking back toward the truck, popping open the rear hatch with practiced motion. Inside was their rescue kit, mostly meant for snare cuts, tranquilizer work, and the occasional sedated relocation. But this was different. He grabbed the essentials: planks, rope, stakes, the field shovel, and a radio. Chloe checked the tranquilizer gun and pulled a dosage vial from the case. "We need to sedate her before anything else," she said. "She's already struggling to breathe. If she panics, she'll go under," Thomas finished. They worked quickly. Chloe prepped the dart, double-checking the dose for a lioness in distress, her fingers trembling just slightly as she loaded it into the rifle. Thomas placed wooden planks across the edges of the pit to distribute his weight. Seifu didn't move. He stayed close to his mother, his body pressed low, watching with wide, uncertain eyes. Chloe crouched near the edge, the dart gun resting on her knee. She waited for the right angle. The lioness watched her. She didn't snarl. She didn't growl. She just blinked slowly, like she understood, like she was giving permission. Chloe pulled the trigger. The dart hit the lioness's upper shoulder with a soft thwip, and for a moment nothing happened. Then Nayla exhaled, a long, shaky breath, and closed her eyes. "She's down," Chloe said. Thomas tested the first plank, then another. The ground held. He clipped a rope to his belt and began to descend into the pit. The heat was worse inside. The smell of damp earth, animal fear, and decay lingered thick in the air. The mud had started to crack at the top, but still held the dense, sucking weight underneath. He knelt beside her, placed a palm against her side. Still breathing, but shallow. He worked fast, threading the rope beneath her shoulders, careful not to trap her airway. Chloe kept the tension steady above, watching the cub for any sudden moves. Thomas secured the knots, signaled up, and began backing away. Chloe hooked the rope to the truck's winch. She whispered under her breath as it began to tighten. "Please hold. Please don't break." The winch groaned. The rope pulled. And slowly, painfully, inch by inch, the lioness began to rise from the grave. The mud sucked at her like it didn't want to let go. It clung. To her fur, her ribs, her legs. It tore at her dignity. But it didn't win. She slid free. And when she did, Seifu bolted forward, not into the mud, but straight to her side. He touched her face gently with his nose, then looked up at the humans as if trying to say something more. Thank you. Or maybe just help her live. They laid Nayla on the boards, poured water over her fur to cool her body, cleared her nose, checked her pulse again. Chloe reached for the radio to call in a vet, maybe even backup, but paused. Thomas looked at her. Think she'll make it? Chloe didn't answer. Instead, she knelt beside Seifu, placed a hand on the ground near him. He didn't move away. The sun still beat down, but something had shifted in the air. Not cooler, not quieter, but changed. Hope didn't roar like a lion. It whispered. And today it whispered through the cracked earth of a forgotten quarry, carried by a cub who refused to let his mother go. The rope slackened, the winch fell silent, and for the first time in hours, the pit no longer groaned beneath its prey. The lioness now lay on solid ground, barely, but out of the trap. Her fur was matted with layers of thick gray sludge, parts of it drying into a cracked shell over her ribs and neck. Her breathing was faint but regular, rising and falling like a tide that refused to give up. Thomas knelt beside her with one knee on the wooden plank, a damp cloth in one hand, wiping away the last of the mud from her nostrils. She twitched faintly at the touch, but didn't stir. Chloe stood nearby with the first aid kit, her hands trembling as she prepared the antibiotic spray they'd used on other rescues. Impala with snare wounds, a zebra with a broken leg, even a baboon once, but never a lion. Not like this. "She's cooling too fast," Thomas said, voice low but urgent. "That mud's not just drying, it's pulling heat from her faster than the sun can warm her back up." Chloe nodded. "We need to get her body temperature stabilized. Give me the tarp from the truck, and the emergency blankets." Thomas stood and jogged to the vehicle, boots crunching through gravel, dust clouding around his heels. Sefou sat just beyond the Lioness's flank, watching everything. He didn't make a sound. He didn't flinch when Chloe approached or when Thomas returned. But his eyes tracked every motion with an intensity that made Chloe's chest ache. He was protecting her, not with teeth, not with claws, but with presence, with stillness. Chloe crouched again beside Nayla and gently placed one of the mylar survival blankets over her side. It shimmered in the light like metal leaves, fluttering slightly in the breeze. Thomas followed with a second, then the tarp to shield them from the worst of the sun. They worked silently, efficiently, as if sound might unravel the moment. "Look at her paws," Chloe said after a few minutes. Thomas glanced down. The lioness's front paws, half curled into the dirt, were raw. The pads cracked, edges swollen from strain and dehydration. She hadn't just been trapped, she'd been fighting the whole time. "She must have been in there for hours," Thomas muttered. "Maybe more." Chloe reached for the portable thermometer, carefully inserting the tip beneath the lioness's armpit. The reading blinked. Too low, not critical, but close. "She's still sedated," Chloe said. "We've got maybe 20 minutes before it wears off. If she wakes too early, she'll panic. She'll tear her insides worse trying to stand." Thomas didn't answer. He stood, eyes scanning the quarry, his instincts kicking into high alert. He looked for movement, sound, dust trails, anything that suggested other lions, other predators, or worse, humans with weapons. They were still alone. The world around them held its breath. Sefou moved for the first time in minutes. He stood, slowly, and stepped closer to his mother. His little nose twitched, then touched hers, the gentlest of contacts. Nayla exhaled, a sound like gravel dragged across steel. "She's coming back," Chloe whispered. Thomas checked the pulse at her neck. Heartbeats picking up, breathing too. Chloe didn't look up. She was watching Sefou. He was licking his mother's cheek now, over and over, not just grooming. Something else, something ancient, as if trying to remind her where she was, who she was, that she wasn't alone. "Thomas," Chloe said. He turned. "You realize what just happened here?" He nodded slowly. "A cub went looking for help, and found us." "No," she said, voice cracking. "He brought us." Thomas didn't respond. He looked at the lioness again, then at the cub. The wind shifted, cooler now, lifting the edge of the tarp and carrying the scent of old blood, dried mud, and the faintest trace of something cleaner. Rain, maybe, in the far distance. Then a low rumble from behind. The hills. Another truck. Thomas stood straighter. "Someone else is coming." Chloe followed his gaze. A dust cloud rose behind the far ridge, back along the road they'd driven just hours ago. It moved slowly, deliberately. A wide vehicle. Not poachers, not tourists. It had the look of official transport, maybe a water supply truck or a backup ranger team returning from a different post. Sefou looked too. His ears perked. Then he did something no one expected. He ran, not away, but toward the road. His limp still there, but less pronounced now, driven by urgency. "Should we stop him?" Chloe asked. Thomas shook his head. "He knows what he's doing." Seifu vanished over the ridge. For a few moments, only the wind and the creak of tarp remained. Then the truck came into view, a heavy-duty Land Cruiser with reinforced sides, a government emblem on the hood, 2 figures inside. One leaned out the passenger window as the vehicle slowed, scanning the ridge where the Cub had just appeared. They saw Thomas and Chloe, then the Lioness. Then the truck accelerated. Within seconds, it pulled up alongside the rescue site. The driver stepped out first, an older man, thick-bearded, wearing the dark green uniform of the Wildlife Conservation Unit. His partner, younger, with a notepad already in hand, followed behind. "You two were scheduled to check in at sunrise," the older ranger said, glancing at his watch. "We figured something happened." Chloe exhaled and stepped aside. Something did. Both rangers approached Nayla slowly, eyes narrowing with trained experience. They didn't speak for several seconds. Then the older one said, almost reverently, "She's the one we tracked last season, the lone female, the one who lost her pride." "She didn't lose them," Thomas said. "They left her." The ranger nodded grimly. "They usually do." The younger one knelt beside Chloe, jotting notes. "How long in the pit?" "Hard to say," Chloe answered. "But long enough. She's been buried to the ribs. She should be dead." "But she's not," Thomas added, "because of him." He pointed up the ridge. Seifu had returned. He stood watching from a distance now, his chest rising and falling with exhaustion. His eyes never left his mother. "She led him through this," Chloe said quietly, "and he brought us back." The ranger looked at them both. "This'll make noise," he said. "Someone's going to want photos, maybe even press." Thomas grimaced. "Let's not turn it into a circus." "No," the man agreed. "But stories like this matter, especially for the reserve's image. People want to believe we protect more than just tourist attractions." Chloe nodded. She knew exactly what he meant. If stories like this reached the right ears, ones with checkbooks and concern, funding could come. Grants, more support, better equipment. The kind of things that didn't just save lions. They saved entire ecosystems. Later, someone would write a blog post. A journalist would pitch a piece to a wildlife conservation website. Maybe even run targeted ads on platforms using keywords like animal rescue, wildlife protection, and ecotourism funding, optimizing for high-converting phrases to push policy awareness. But right now, there was no time for that. Right now, there was only one lioness, one cub, one moment. Chloe returned to Nayla's side. The blankets were warm now from her rising body temperature. The lioness stirred faintly, her back leg twitching, her eyes fluttered open, slowly, unsure. Then they locked on Seifu, and everything else faded away. Chloe saw the shift, the flicker of recognition, then the first real sound from Nayla since her rescue, a low, rasping rumble from deep in her chest. Not a growl, not pain. A greeting. Seifu stepped closer, his entire body quivering with emotion. He touched her nose again, then began to lick her fur. The rangers stepped back, giving them space. Thomas watched silently. Chloe blinked quickly and turned away. Sometimes mercy didn't roar. Sometimes it simply lay beside you and waited. The air hung still as midday settled over the quarry, turning stone and dust into hot plates beneath the sun. The tarps rustled faintly with each breeze, but the heat was relentless, pressing down from above and radiating from below. It was the kind of heat that warped metal and cooked silence, the kind that dried out voices before they even formed. Under the makeshift canopy, the lioness lay motionless except for the slow, deliberate rise and fall of her chest. Nayla's breath was heavier now, deeper, no longer labored, but weighted with the exhaustion of survival. The hard line of her spine was visible beneath the curve of her shoulders. She hadn't moved much since waking, but her eyes never left her cub. Sefu stayed close. He'd curled himself against her side, his head tucked beneath the crook of her neck, ears twitching now and then at the soft buzz of flies. His breathing matched hers, slow, watchful. Every so often he'd lift his head and scan the perimeter, just as she used to do. He was learning. Chloe moved quietly around them, checking the lioness's temperature again, logging it in her notebook. Thomas stood near the truck, speaking in low tones with the older ranger, both men with arms folded and eyes narrowed against the sun. Their conversation was brief, more nods than words, the kind of understanding that passed between people who'd seen enough to know when to act and when to let nature lead. "They're stable," Chloe said finally, her voice carrying softly across the quarry floor. Thomas walked over and squatted beside her. "She going to make it?" "I think so. She's still dehydrated and will need to watch for infection. But she's got the will. That's more than most." Thomas looked at the lioness, his eyes lingering for a long moment. Then he glanced at Sefu. "That cub brought us here." "Yeah," Chloe replied. "He did." A pause. "And he's not afraid of us." "No," she said. "Not anymore." That was something. Trust wasn't a currency freely given in the wild. It had to be earned, moment by moment, breath by breath. And somehow this little lion had found a way to believe that help might come from the two-legged creatures he'd been taught to avoid. Chloe stood and stretched her arms, wincing at the soreness in her back. She scanned the sky. The vultures had pulled back, their black wings now distant shadows in the blue. A few still circled, but without the scent of death. They wouldn't stay long. The younger ranger approached, holding out a handheld radio. "Satellite's up. We've got a signal. Want me to call in a vet for pickup?" Chloe hesitated. Nayla stirred slightly under the blankets. The call would bring sedation, transport, crates. More human hands, more noise. It might save her life. It might break her spirit. She looked at Thomas. He said nothing. They both knew what it meant. Then Chloe turned to the younger ranger. "Not yet." "Ma'am?" Wait, just a little longer. Let her wake on her own terms." The ranger nodded and stepped back, uncertain but respectful. Sefu licked his mother's ear, then looked up at Chloe again. It wasn't fear anymore. It was awareness, recognition, understanding. She crouched slowly and extended her hand. Not to touch, just to be near. Sefu didn't move away. The light shifted slightly as clouds passed in front of the sun. A breeze followed behind them, brushing through the quarry like a memory. It carried the smell of distant trees, warm earth and water, far off but real. Chloe turned her face toward it. "That's from the east," she murmured. Thomas nodded. "River systems over that ridge, 30 clicks. She'll need water soon. She'll need strength first." More time passed. They waited. The lioness slept, woke, blinked, and slept again. Each time she woke, she stayed alert a little longer. Her muscles twitched. Her breathing sharpened. She began shifting, her weight slightly under the blankets, testing her body again. Chloe watched the signs carefully. "She's close," she said. "Maybe an hour." "We stay," Thomas replied. Chloe took the opportunity to document everything, photos, notes, GPS logs. She captured images of the pit, the rope system, the cub curled beside his mother. Each picture told a story, but none of them told all of it. The real story lived in the pauses, in the silence, in the way Sefu refused to sleep unless he could feel her heartbeat. By early afternoon, Nayla stirred with more purpose. Her legs shifted beneath her, her head lifted fully. She sniffed the air once, twice, then turned her gaze toward the distant ridge, where the vultures had been. Then she looked back at her cub. She leaned her head toward him and licked his cheek. Chloe let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. "She's back." Thomas moved toward the truck and brought over a small container, slices of raw meat from the portable cooler, normally used for carnivore baiting during collaring missions. This time, it was a peace offering. He placed it several feet from the Lioness, then stepped away. Nayla looked at the food, then at the humans. She didn't move. Seifu sniffed the air, recognized the scent, and stood. He padded over slowly, ears forward, and crouched to eat. His movements were slow but confident. Nayla watched him, then rolled to one side with effort and placed her front paws firmly on the ground. She pushed herself up. Her body trembled, her legs buckled once. But she stood, not fully, but enough. She limped toward her cub and joined him. The moment was quiet, but it pulsed with weight. A mother who had fought through mud and silence and fear. A cub who had cried out into a world that had so often ignored cries like his, and had been heard. Chloe took another photo. She would caption it later. But in her heart she already knew the words. The Lioness sobbed and pleaded for help. And someone came. The key word sat in her mind like a seed, wildlife rescue success story. Something grant writers loved. Something donors searched for. Something that might turn this moment into a ripple that saved more than just 2 lives. But for now, there were no speeches, no fundraisers, no press. Just a lioness licking her cub between bites of meat. Just 2 people watching from a respectful distance. Just time, stolen back from the sun. Thomas knelt beside the truck, pulled off his hat, and wiped the sweat from his brow. He looked out across the quarry, where shadows had begun to stretch and the air finally cooled. "Tomorrow," he said quietly, "this place will be just another pit again." Chloe nodded. But not today. They packed up the unused supplies, double-checked the sedation records, and marked the site on the GPS logs. Seifu had finished eating. Nayla lay beside him again, her body curled protectively around his small frame. She blinked slowly at the humans, then closed her eyes. Sleep this time wasn't from weakness. It was from safety, from trust, from peace. The sun had begun its slow descent, taking with it the edge of the heat that had pressed down on the quarry all afternoon. Shadows crept back into the cracks of the land, stretching long and thin across the broken stone. Light softened, losing its harsh white glare and turning gold, then amber. It was the kind of light that made even the ugliest places look gentle. But the quarry could not be softened completely. The mud pit was still there, still waiting, still hungry. It was silent again now, its surface undisturbed, as if nothing had ever struggled beneath it, as if no life had nearly ended there. But just a few feet away, life rested. Nayla lay curled in the cool dirt beside her cub. Her sides rose and fell with steady rhythm. Her muscles, though sore and weak, had begun to feel like her own again. The sedation had faded. The terror had dulled. She had eaten. She had stood. And now she watched. She watched the humans as they packed their gear, careful not to come too close. She watched Seifu as he slept, his small body pressed against her belly. And she watched the sky, as if waiting for it to tell her what came next. Chloe moved slowly, taking down the last of the makeshift tarp. She worked quietly, not wanting to disturb the moment. Thomas loaded the last of the equipment into the truck, shutting the rear gate with a quiet thunk. The older ranger had left earlier, taking the second vehicle and his partner with him. There hadn't been room for all of them to stay, and now only the 3 of them remained. 2 humans and one story they would never forget. Chloe approached slowly, crouching several feet from the Lioness, careful to stay outside her circle of comfort. She didn't reach for her camera this time. There were no more photos to take. "I thought you were gone," she said softly, voice barely above a whisper. "But you weren't. You just needed one more chance." Nayla didn't move, but her eyes blinked once, slowly. Chloe smiled. "She understands," she said over her shoulder to Thomas. He didn't answer. He was watching the ridge. Chloe followed his gaze. A shape moved at the top of the quarry. A lion. Just one. Too far to see clearly in the fading light, but close enough to read the posture. Not stalking, not curious. Watching. Thomas's shoulders tightened. "That's not the cub's father, is it?" Chloe looked again, then nodded. "It's him." Ayo. He had returned. Nayla's ears twitched. She lifted her head slowly, following the same line of sight. Her eyes narrowed slightly. She didn't growl. She didn't move. Seifu stirred beside her, blinking sleep from his eyes. He followed his mother's gaze and tensed when he saw the lion. Ayo didn't move. He stood like a statue, his sparse mane catching the golden light. Thomas took a cautious step forward, hand near the tranquilizer rifle. "You want me to scare him off?" Chloe shook her head. "No." "But if he—" "He won't," she said, quietly, because she knew. Nayla stood slowly, rising to her full height. She winced slightly, but her legs held firm. Her ribs expanded with a full breath, and her tail swept low behind her. She stepped forward, placing herself between the cub and the lion on the ridge. Not as a threat, as a statement. I'm still here. Seifu moved to her side, mirroring her posture. Ayo didn't flinch, but something in his stance changed. His ears dropped slightly, his tail swayed. Then, without a sound, he turned and walked away. Not a retreat, not shame, just distance, just a closing of a chapter that had been written long ago. Nayla watched until he disappeared behind the stone outcrop. Then she lowered her head and shook it. Once, a slow, deliberate motion, a gesture not meant for him, but for herself, for the pride that had left her, for the pain that had nearly drowned her, for the past that no longer mattered. Chloe felt something deep in her chest shift. That shake of the head held more weight than any roar. It was the final refusal, the refusal to die in that pit, the refusal to be defined by abandonment, the refusal to need anyone else to survive. Thomas exhaled. "She's strong," Chloe nodded. She always was. They stood there, letting the moment settle. Then Nayla turned her gaze toward them. There was no fear in her eyes, no aggression, only awareness, and perhaps a flicker of gratitude that neither human dared to name out loud. Seifu stepped forward, brushing his flank against her leg. He looked once more at the two humans, then turned his head to the west, toward the rising slope beyond the quarry. Nayla followed his gaze, and then she began to walk. No fanfare, no pause, just motion, steady, quiet, purposeful. Seifu limped slightly, but kept pace. They left the quarry behind without looking back. Chloe felt her throat tighten. "She's not returning to the Pride," she said. "No," Thomas agreed. "She's starting her own." The wind picked up, cooler now, as the sun dipped lower. It carried the scent of dry stone, distant rain, and something else. Hope, maybe. Or something close enough. Thomas climbed into the truck. Chloe followed, closing the door softly behind her. They didn't start the engine yet. They sat for a moment longer, watching until the golden light swallowed the last glimpses of tawny fur between the rocks. Then Thomas said, "When we write this one up—" Chloe looked at him. "We don't call it a rescue," he said. "We call it what it was." "And what's that?" "A response." Chloe smiled faintly. "That's going to make one hell of a Grant story." She didn't mean it to be cynical. She meant it to be useful, because stories like this needed to be told. because people needed to see that compassion could cross species, that courage could come in the smallest forms, and that even in the loneliest places, someone might still answer when a lioness pleads for help. The truck started with a low rumble, headlights flickering on as twilight deepened. They pulled away slowly, leaving the quarry behind. And somewhere out there, under a sky slowly filling with stars, a mother and her cub walked forward, together, free and unbroken. The sun had long since dipped beneath the rim of the hills, but the afterglow lingered, washing the savanna in a soft amber light. Shadows deepened, not with menace, but with peace. The winds quieted. The sky turned a gentle lavender, smeared with the first stars. It was the hour between the heat and the cold, the breath between day and night, and in that breath they walked. Nayla's steps were slow but steady. Her body still ached, her back legs stiff, her ribs sore where the mud had pressed too long, but her posture had returned. Her shoulders lifted higher, her tail swayed in rhythm. She no longer walked like something that had survived. She walked like something that still owned the land beneath her feet. Seifu trotted beside her, occasionally stumbling on the uneven terrain, but always catching himself. His limp was still there, but no longer hesitant. Each step he took was a declaration. I'm still here. I'm not done. The quarry faded behind them. The ghosts of what had almost happened stayed behind in the cracks and dust. Ahead lay open grass, broken only by the silhouettes of thorn trees and distant ridges. They didn't have a destination. Not yet. But they were moving, and that was enough. Far behind them, the headlights of the truck flickered once, then disappeared over the horizon. Chloe sat in the passenger seat, quiet. She hadn't spoken in the last 20 minutes, not because there was nothing to say, but because the words she had didn't feel worthy. Thomas kept his eyes on the road, one hand resting loose on the wheel. The other held the camera Chloe had used earlier. He passed it to her without a word. She scrolled through the images. The pit, the mud, the blankets, the cub's face. The moment the lioness stood. Each photo was sharp, framed perfectly. But none of them captured what really mattered. None of them held the moment where something passed between species, without language, without trade, without promise. That moment had no shape. But it had weight. I'm going to write it, Chloe said softly, more to herself than to Thomas. He nodded. You should. It might help. It will. Chloe didn't need to ask what he meant. She knew. People didn't care about statistics. They cared about stories. They cared about names, faces, moments. If she could make them see what she'd seen, feel what she'd felt, maybe the funding would come. Maybe another lion wouldn't die in a forgotten ditch. She closed the camera and set it on the dash. I won't call it a miracle, she said. Good, Thomas replied. It wasn't. No, she said. It was earned. Somewhere between the quarry and the eastern ridge, Nayla paused. She lifted her head, nose catching the wind. A scent. Water. Not close, but not far either. A river bend, maybe, or a seasonal pond that hadn't dried up yet. Enough for a night's rest. Enough for her cub to drink. Seifu stopped beside her, panting lightly. She turned her head and looked at him. He looked back. They didn't need to speak. They hadn't needed to since the beginning. He was her reason. She was his home. Together they kept walking. As they climbed a low hill dusted with scrub grass and small white flowers, Nayla paused again. Behind her, the moon had begun to rise. Not full, not new, just enough to cast silver shadows across the landscape. She turned. Not back toward the pit, not back toward the pride that left her, but toward the road where the truck had driven away. No lights now, no sound, just memory. She stared for a long moment. Then she blinked. Once, twice, slow and deliberate, a lion's way of saying, I see you, I trust you, her version of gratitude, wordless, complete. Seifu watched her, then followed her gaze. He didn't understand why she blinked like that, but one day he would, and maybe one day, if he ever saw a human again, he would remember. The next morning, long after the lioness and her cub had disappeared into the folds of the land, a different truck arrived at the quarry, a field team. They had been sent to inspect the site, confirm the rescue, document the mud pit. One man walked the perimeter. Another took samples. A third scanned the area with a drone, logging everything into a conservation app optimized for real-time wildlife tracking. They found the drag marks, the paw prints, the boards, the broken rope. The story was all there, etched into the dirt. But it wasn't until they reached the far edge of the pit that one of them stopped and stared. There, pressed into a patch of still-drying mud, were two prints. Not paw prints, boot prints, side by side with a single small paw. The man crouched down and took a picture. Later, it would appear on the Foundation's website. A headline would read, "When a cub cried for help, two strangers answered." Underneath, the copywriter would use words like emergency wildlife response, human-animal bond, nonprofit conservation impact. Keywords like rescue donations, wildlife grants, and animal rehabilitation would be built into the page for digital outreach. And somewhere across the country, someone with a soft heart and a savings account would click Donate. But the lioness would never know that. She didn't need to, because the story didn't belong to the press or the grants or the world. It belonged to her, to her cub, to the breath they shared when everything else tried to take it away. That night, in a quiet stretch of open savanna, under a sky blinking with stars, Nayla curled herself around Seifu once more. He pressed close. She licked the top of his head. Then, for the first time in days, she closed her eyes and slept without fear. And in the hush of the wild, where stories don't need words, the earth held them gently. It remembered, and so would we.